Okay, good morning, everybody, or afternoon, depending on where you happen to be. It's 11:30 and time for us to get started with our webinar. Nancy, if you could switch to the next slide, that would be great. And we want to just thrilled that you're all here. We're excited about being able to share with you what we've got going. Just a few housekeeping items. We are recording the webinar. I actually clicked the button, so I know we are. If you have questions along the way, please type them into the chat window or the Q&A, and we will try to answer them as we go along if we can, but certainly at the end. If anybody needs a certificate of participation for professional development purposes, just type that fact into the chat window, or if you are watching this as a recording, you can email us, and I'll have my email address a little bit later. Karen has posted a link to the slides so that you can download them if you would like to do that. And we'll be posting some links to some other documents as we move along. So we're very excited today. Nancy Weinstein, who's the CEO of Mindprint Learning, and I, Betsy Hill, president of BrainWare Learning, are here and really eager to share some things with you. Nancy is just an amazing person, as is Mindprint itself. And it's just so fascinating, so just intriguing to think about the kinds of ways we can use data about our students' cognitive strengths and weaknesses. And this is just another really great example. So Nancy, thanks for joining me today, and we'll let you go ahead and kick things off. And I may need to unmute you again.
We good to
Yeah,
go?
there we go.
Hopefully everybody can hear me now.
Yep.
So happy summer. Betsy, Karen, and team, thank you so much for having me. I am thrilled to take you through the sort of next iteration or application of Mindprint. I'm going to assume for the purposes of this webinar that most of the participants are familiar with the Mindprint platform and the types of cognitive skills that we're testing. If you're not and want to circle back after the webinar to go into more detail there, we are more than happy to do that. But today's focus is really going to be about understanding how the cognitive skills that we assess with Mindprint will directly relate to standardized test prep. Specifically in this case, we do focus on ACT and SAT, but a lot of these skills are very transferable to all formats of standardized tests, and we're happy to answer questions around them, whether it's AP exams or end of year summative assessments, statewide assessments. So we appreciate you're all coming and look forward to providing this information, and then of course answering any questions you have during the webinar or after. So okay, here we go. So what we will do today and the time that we have is I will provide everyone with an overview of the Mindprint test report, how we look at Mindprint predictions of test prep performance versus students' actual skills, and the factors that are going to drive into improving performance. We'll talk about specific strategies that you can use with your students based on the outcomes of the Mindprint reporting, and how you can help and support them, and then answer any questions that you have. So hopefully most of you are familiar with the learner profile that we use. This is a standard Mindprint profile. This is not going away. So we just want to emphasize that it's always good to understand your students' strengths and needs across these 10 skills. They will drive your students' learning success for the long-term learning outcomes, metacognition. That said, to the extent that you acquire a student or start working with a student, your focus is specifically on test prep. In a lot of cases, you have sometimes as few as 4 weeks, sometimes maybe as long as 12 weeks, often not that much longer. This might not be the most practical way to start working with them. You have an objective, which is to increase a test score. And so the reports that we're going to talk about today are more around how do I quickly and efficiently improve my students' performance. And hopefully along the way, you'll be able to develop some of these skills, create an awareness, but understanding and improving these cognitive skills is, as we know, a much longer process and an intense process specifically focused on that. So with that, I'm going to launch into this is the new Mindprint Test Prep Profile. What you see here is a student's performance, predicted performance on the ACT and the SAT based on their Mindprint results. So the student would take their 1-hour Mindprint assessment. What you as the tutor or professional would provide are the students' actual scores on a diagnostic assessment, whether they're doing it in your office and it's an assessment that you use, or they took a real life test and you have the results from either the ACT, SAT, or both. So we'll start here on the ACT side. What you would provide Mindprint with are the students' 4 scores on the subject tests, their English, math, reading, and science. Those are the 21, 25, 21, and 24 you're seeing on the screen. That is the sort of thin, darker line that you see plotted. The range and the lighter shaded bar that you see behind that, those are the students' projected scores based on their Mindprint profile. So we would expect most students, so in this case, Stephen, based on his Mindprint profile, that most of the time he could comfortably score between a 17 and a 27. And a stretch goal for him would be in this lighter shaded area, which would be all the way to 36. Now, I will say you'll probably notice that the English has a much wider band than the other 3 scores. And for those of you who are very familiar with the test, you can imagine the English test is the subject test where you can most easily prepare and study for and do more work for, which is why you're going to get the broader band on that. In this case, Stephen has a broader band actually even than most students. But you'll see that this is the sort of general range that we would expect the student to be in. And the reason that this is nice to have is that it helps you as the tutor manage expectations, because we are all familiar with the student that does really well in school and their grades are really good and the test prep scores don't match that. And the parent or the student is frustrated and they don't know why. And even if they're a straight A student, they might not be the student that's going to score a 31 or a 33 on the ACT. Helping you as a tutor understand that and what's a healthy and expected range, what's a good stretch goal, gets you there. You'll of course have your own opinion, you'll have worked with the student, but this gives you another objective set of data to put it in context and make sure that you're on the right page of what your goals for that student should be. When you see here the symbol, the sort of blue bullseye, that shows that right now the student's performing within the expected range, where we would expect that student to score. So they might be at the lower end, the higher end, but they're sort of within the range. What you can see here on the SAT side is this is a student that's performing a little bit below where we would expect him to be. And this gives you the opportunity, one, within the range to say, where should I prioritize my study time with the student? Where can I get the biggest bang for my buck? If I only have a couple of sessions or a couple of months to work with the student, where do I want to spend the most time? So in the case here of Stephen, we might not want to spend that much time on the science section because we can see he's here at the higher end of the range, whereas with reading or English, there seems to be a lot more opportunity for improvement. So we might want to spend the time there. For those students that you're still struggling, are they better for ACT or SAT? Our general view at Mindprint is to choose one test and work on that rather than having the students prepare for both tests. Now, lots of tutors have different opinions on that subject. Some people feel that the tests are consistent enough and similar enough that it's better for the student to prepare for both and see which one they do better, we do still see differences among the tests and differences in the Mindprint skills that are going to drive performance. So in the case here, we would say that Stephen is a better candidate to take the ACT than his SAT. We project his overall projected score as a score based on the high end of the expected range. So in this case, the 27, 26, 26, and 27, which is getting us to his overall projected score of a 26, and his SAT equivalent would be a 1240. In contrast, when we look at his SAT scores, we're using these scores here, and you'll see, if you're not familiar with the breakdown of the scores, with the SAT, you would add the 32 and the 35 together to get his 670 in verbal, and you would double the math score and multiply it by 10 to get his 640 in math, so a 1210 equivalent. In this case, it's actually not far off, right? So Stephen might actually be a student where you say, well, if he's far more comfortable in the SAT and he likes the SAT better, it's not that much of a difference. Let him take whichever one he's more comfortable with. In some students, we do find a much more significant discrepancy. So it really does depend. But the idea is this gives you a very comfortable reporting of the student score, their expectations. We're getting a lot of positive feedback that we are we're setting pretty good expectations for tutors of where they expect their students to be. What I would encourage you to take away from this is that this range is sort of, I don't want to say a fixed range, but in the 4 weeks to 12 weeks that you might have with a student, you might not be able to exceed the high end of the range for a student. Like, you're not going to change the student's complex reasoning skills, and these skills are pretty much driven off of their complex reasoning. That said, where they fall within these ranges, and the ranges are broad, they give plenty of opportunity for improvement, those are the skills where you can manage and drive their test taking and their efficiency. So this is a report that is actually built into to our system, and it will look familiar for those of you who are familiar with our academic reporting. We take and look at what we call our test taking skills. So the skills that are really going to drive student performance. So, and these are driven mostly more off of things like executive functions, your attention, your working memory, your processing efficiency. And these are things, if we understand them, we can help the student control and manage around it, right? So we're not going to take a student that's their verbal reasoning, complex reasoning scores are what they haven't changed. But if we can teach them how to manage around their focus, if they're sort of less likely to be able to take a 3-hour test and maintain that stamina, how do we manage around it to optimize their score? So we look at, we take the Mindprint skills and we triangulate them to come up with a measure of focus, which is your ability to sort of work quickly and accurately, right, as you're working, and not make sort of those might call careless mistakes or inconsistent or scattered errors. Stamina is a little bit different. That's your ability to maintain focus throughout the duration of this, 75 questions on the English test, or maintain your stamina by the time you get to that 4th science section. There's careful responding, so we know we have students that are more likely to sort of jump at the first right answer. We want to flag those students and then teach them strategies for what we call careful responding. Solving efficiency is more along the lines of, can you work through those multi-step problems without making careless errors? Visual spatial efficiency, there we're focused on more of the mechanics. I mean, there are some students that will just struggle with the bubble sheet format, working quickly and efficiently between test book and answer key. Those are strategies that we can work with them. Students who don't struggle with visual spatial efficiency, we wouldn't want to spend a whole lot of time there. But for students who are struggling with spatial skills or visual motor skills, and giving them a couple of strategies to work and get a couple more questions done more efficiently, or not miss a row and miss the gridding in, can make all the difference in the world. There are students that we know have stronger memory skills, and so how can we use that to build up some more automaticity and sort of that rote knowledge so that they can work more quickly and efficiently, versus if the student has weaker memory, we might just have to go back and sort of fill in the gaps, but we wouldn't want to spend a whole lot of time memorizing extra material because that's not going to be the most efficient use of the student's time. And then finally, there's sort of the coachability factor. So there are students that we give all the right strategies to, they go along with it, they nod, and then they get on a practice test or the real test and they don't use the strategies. So we want to be able to identify those students before the fact rather than after the fact, and sort of coach them along, watch them a little more carefully so we make sure that they're using all the strategies that we're giving them and applying them and following through on them. So it's sort of a two-part report that's intentionally designed. We think you'll be comfortable working with this report, sharing it with students and with parents to say, here are the test-taking skills that we're going to work on and help you develop, and here are some of the strategies that we're going to use. Some tutors are more or less comfortable sharing specific target goals with their students, so they may or may not want to share this report. So that's why we keep these two reports separate. And we can have a longer discussion in the Q&A about how you might want to approach it with your students. I talked a little bit about this in the previous slide, but here's sort of just a basic skill translation. Right, so when we talk about the test prep profile and the strategies you were seeing, here are the primary Mindprint skills that we use. So we have our own algorithms. We've been doing this for a while, feel pretty confident in them. But for those who want to say, well, how are you getting there? What's the secret sauce? This gives you a good feeling for the primary skills that are driving that. Our goal is to make your life easier. You focus on areas like focus and stamina and careful responding. We worry about the specific score that they're getting on attention, accuracy versus speed or processing speed, so that you sort of know really where you need to focus rather than worrying about sort of the specific numbers behind it. We don't just leave you hanging with this is where your student is and this is what you need to do. We provide you with the accompanying strategies. What I want to say about our strategies is we realize if you're doing test prep, we recognize you have plenty of your own strategies. You've been doing this for a while. You might automatically know what a student needs once the problem's been identified, but we want you to know that to the point, in the case that you do get stuck or you need more ideas or you want more specific tied to Mindprint, we're providing those strategies for you. We come at the strategies from two different directions. So we provide you strategies specifically based on the subject test. So for the ACT, English, math, reading, and science. So what you will have is a strategy about, here you can see here, improving math performance. So if you know that you've said, my greatest opportunity for improvement with this student is in math, I want to focus on math with this student, you might start here. And we will give you, based on where you're seeing the gaps in the student's performance in math, strategies that you can use. And here are just sort of two examples of sort of general solving strategies, graph and chart questions, which you'll approach very differently than a straight algebra question. Right? And the way our strategies are set up, if you're not familiar with them, they're set up as a slideshow. So you'll have math strategies and then you'll have multiple sheets and you can scroll through them. To the extent that you're looking for strategies more along the line, so it's not subject specific, but I have a student that has trouble maintaining focus. How do I help them? We give you general strategies. So here you can see maintain your focus up here. And then you'll have general strategies for focus across all 4 tests. So sort of very generically, what do you need to do if your student has struggles to maintain focus throughout the test? Then beneath that, what we give you are the subject-specific strategies. So, okay, they struggle with focus, and specifically, they're having the most difficulty in English and language. Now we're giving you strategies specific to English and language. Versus in science, they might not need the strategies because they're doing great and they, for whatever reason, they love science and they have no problem maintaining their focus on the science section. Let's not spend time there, right? But let's identify where you're seeing the patterns in the student-specific responses. That's data that you have. You know the student best. You're working with them. They're giving you feedback on where they're struggling, and you and your tutors can work with them. But the strategies are all there. We hope that they're helpful and you can use them. And you can see that they're sort of done in checklist format. So as you work through them, you can cross them off, and you can print these out and check them off as you do things. And then just sort of circling back, we want to make sure that you also know that we have strategies for academic instruction, right? So if you're reteaching math skills because the student has knowledge gaps in math, all the test prep work in the world isn't going to make up for a knowledge gap, right? So you also have and still have your Mindprint report for academic instruction, where we know students, say, might be weaker in math, and then we're giving you the strategies to support numeracy with that student, arithmetic operations, word problems, or geometry and graphs and charts. So that's, again, still there. So there are multiple places where you need to go, but there aren't that many places. So it's really 3 different places to go to for the information. And as you know what you need best, so that you can go and sort of find what you need when you need it in the most efficient way. So that's it for the Mindprint portion of it. I don't know if Betsy, if you want to go to questions specifically on Mindprint, or you want to go into how BrainWare can support development of some of these skills as well.
Well, I don't see any questions in the chat window as yet, but please, everybody who's here today, please do type questions in the chat window, and we're happy to address them. And I'll give everybody a minute or so to do that. Let's see if anybody has any questions. One thing I could mention is that if anybody would, when you get to the point of having this information, so the slide that Nancy showed where you see the predictive scores, the predicted results on the ACT and the SAT, if this is a report, this is not automatically within your dashboard, within your account, but if you would like to see this, then it's just a matter of letting us know. And Karen, if you would, we'll send this out afterwards. It's probably easier. Nobody wants to copy down too many links while they're in here. We do have a question here. Can these strategies and approaches be used with any standardized tests, not just the ACT and the SAT?
So, of course, with the caveat that every standardized test is different, I think there are strong commonalities around how standardized tests are designed, and what you'll see is common issues or consistent problems that some students have with standardized tests. And I think what you'll see is these skills that we have here, which we call test-taking skills, will affect students, whether they're taking the ACT and SAT, or they're taking Smarter Balanced or PARCC testing or an AP exam. And so I think you will find that the strategies will help them across tests, right? So how to pace yourself if you have trouble finishing is going to obviously help you whether you're taking the SAT or ACT or the AP exam. What you'll find that is different is that, for example, the pacing on the ACT and the SAT are different as they might be on an AP exam. So you'll know as the tutor whether or not the student is having difficulty with pacing on the exam, and if they are, yes, these strategies will help them.
Great, okay. Feel free, everybody else, to type in questions as well, but maybe we'll go on and talk a little bit. So Nancy mentioned, and maybe you could go to the first of the slides where we talk about BrainWare and skills. That would be great. You don't always have 12 weeks or more to be able to prepare, but if you do have 12 weeks, then you might also think about doing some work with BrainWare SAFARI that would actually help strengthen some of these underlying skills. So we have limited data at this point, mostly anecdotal, about the impact of doing BrainWare, but we do have plenty of evidence of the impact on the skills measured in Mindprint, and I'm happy to share more of that with you. But what I really wanted to do now is to talk a little bit about how BrainWare connects to these test-taking skills that Nancy's been discussing. I want to say one thing first, which is that there's no need to pick and choose exercises in BrainWare as part of preparation for tests. BrainWare, as most of you know, or at least some of you know, is designed to develop skills in different ways and different combinations throughout the program, so you don't have to go and just work in one area. In fact, the recommendation for users would still be to have them move around throughout the program and across all of the various exercises. But what I want to do, and I'm going to ask Karen also to post another couple of links. We have recently updated our chart of the skills developed in BrainWare SAFARI and the common language definitions of those skills, so that these now reflect the way that the skills are generally characterized, the way that we talk about things like executive functions and working memory and inhibitory control and all that kind of stuff. So she's going to post links, and we're also happy to send those out. So when we start to think about things like focus, which is, of course, requires a lot of sustained attention, as Nancy talked about, and the ability to screen out irrelevant stimuli and distractions, I think about level 2 of web weaving, which some of you are familiar with. And for those of you who aren't, by the way, if you would like to explore BrainWare more, or Mindprint because you haven't used it yet, you'll have our contact information at the end and be able to, we'd be delighted to walk you through that and give you whatever you need to understand how it works. So at level 2 of web weaving, which I was talking about, what you have to do, the player has to click to a metronome beat 5 times before drawing lines to replicate a visual image, which requires you to hold information in working memory while you're performing that distracting activity. Or rhythm ribbit, which is a metronome exercise, which requires pretty intense focus for periods of time and gradually develops that. When I think about stamina, one of the keys in my mind is the ability to pace yourself. That's what Nancy actually was just talking about. And again, rhythm ribbit does that, as does jungle labyrinth. The maze exercise that students love and will do over and over again. And they, of course, when they're doing this, really have no idea that they're building stamina, but what they are doing is building their ability to sense and pace their ability to accomplish things in a reasonable amount of time. Inhibitory control is one of those executive functions that I'm sure, and I know for a fact, because I know many of you who are on this webinar today, is so evident if it's there or if it's not there when we see students' impulsive behavior or just picking the first answer that seems plausible. And there are several exercises within BrainWare that require the player to stop and click to a beat or to wait for something else before acting. And as simple as that seems, practicing that skill over and over again to the level that it becomes automatic over time, as players do in BrainWare, has helped many users be more patient, more thoughtful, I guess, and more careful about answering questions on tests. If we could go to the next slide, we're looking at basically efficiency kinds of skills when we're taking tests. How we solve problems, how we manage visual spatial information. And here it was really hard for me to pick some exercises to highlight because BrainWare works on visual spatial skills, especially throughout the program. So, but here I chose Jumping Jaguar Flash, an exercise that works on visual span, that is how much information you can take in a glance, and Piranha Pass, which is really works well. You have to guide your swimmer, estimate distances, visualize where they will travel as they go along coordinates on a grid. And it really does a great job of helping to integrate a variety of visual spatial skills, including directionality and a variety of spatial relationships. So the last slide on test taking skills in BrainWare focuses on memorization and then coachability. And I do want to comment that BrainWare was designed more around visual memory than verbal memory. But having said that, as anyone who has used the program will likely attest, and if you know the exercise called sky scanning, it's a very challenging exercise, one that most users find to be perhaps the most challenging in the program, because it requires the significant use of auditory working memory, the ability to rearrange and manipulate that information, and the integration of that with visual skills. And then internal recall, of course, works on long-term memory, so both applicable both to verbal and to visual information. And finally, as Nancy has pointed out, coachability is a key concept as you work with clients. Just to take one more example, Iguana Lookout is an exercise most known for the way that it works on directionality. So understanding left and right and being able to project those directions onto other objects and rotate them or manipulate them in space. But we layer in some other cognitive processes at some of the upper levels because we focus on integrating all these skills. So for example, at level 4 in Iguana Lookout, the player clicks on the directions the arrow points when the arrows are pointing left or right, but you have to click on the up button if the arrow points down and the down button if the arrow points up. So talk about cognitive flexibility. And that, of course, is one of the essential components of being coachable, the ability to look at things from another perspective and to change your approach as something doesn't work. So now I want to give everybody a chance to ask some more questions. And I think you've already talked about this a little bit, Nancy, but perhaps you could revisit the question about sharing these reports and how you best share them with students and with parents.
Okay. Hold on, I'm trying to move my screen back so I can get back to the, wrong way. So I will start by saying our understanding, talking to our tutors who have been using these reports, is it's a very comfortable, effective way to talk about which test-taking strategies they want to work with a student using this report. And this has been a really effective tool to say, it's not just about your knowledge, it's not just about where your strengths or capabilities are. This is what we need. Taking a standardized test is very different than taking a classroom test or doing well on a paper. And so this is the area that we're going to focus, and here are some strategies that we're going to use. So I think without hesitation, talking through this type of report with a student or a parent has been an exceptional support for the tutors that have been using it. This report, I really think it is sort of student specific and case specific. So I think that where we've had tutors where there might be reluctance, frankly, is that if a tutor's not convinced that a student's going to put in the effort to reach a target score or a stretch goal, they don't want to mismanage expectations. And so they, quite frankly, might not be comfortable saying, if you work hard enough, Stephen, you can get a 36, right? And that's understandable given he's sitting at a 21, right? So you don't want a parent walking away and say, hey, Stephen can get a 36 if he tries hard enough. And so I think that's where you want to be careful. That said, I look at this as like really, frankly, truly encouraging. You're talking about a student that I think would average out to a 22 if you looked at his scores, maybe a 23. And then, really could probably very comfortably get up to a 26, right? And that's a 10% rise with effort, of course, but feeling very reasonable. Like I'm not sort of stuck here in the low 20s. I can be in the mid to high 20s. So if So, but it depends on the context, and it depends, like, I think in all cases, like knowing your audience. There are parents who are exceptionally open to, this is where we are, and this is where we'd ideally like to be, and this is where we could be, versus a parent who will get a number stuck in their head. And what we don't want to do, from our perspective at Mindprint, is our goal here is to make your job easier and better and support the student, not make your job harder. So we don't want you to go and just hand this report over, show it to a parent, and then you feel like you're on the hook for a 36 on the English test. And so that is our perspective, and that's why we say, depending on your audience, I think there's a lot of times where it's really appropriate to share this report, but there might be cases where we want you to use some caution and not put yourself in an uncomfortable position and feel like there's some things you can't deliver on.
Great. I'm not seeing any other questions, but please, everybody, I suspect there should be some other questions or thoughts or reactions. I do see sort of a question about the kind of impact and movement that we have seen with BrainWare. And we haven't actually had experience with anybody using both Mindprint and BrainWare together in this context. We do have a number of schools who are teaming them together, and but we're really would be very interested in capturing that information. But we have had reports of students improving their ACT scores by 8 or 9 points just from using BrainWare, where they've taken it before or maybe taken it several times and gotten. There was one student I remember who was, and this is a great example of how separate these skills are. And when Nancy was talking before about the student who is maybe a really strong student, but maybe doesn't do as well on tests because some of these sort of more generic underlying skills. We had a student who was on track to be the valedictorian of a class, very high performing, basically getting all A's in school, and went and did quite well on the ACT, except in reading, where he scored a 22. And they thought, oh, maybe it was a bad day. They had him go and take it again. He got a 21. So they decided to have him use BrainWare and then retake the test, retake the ACT, and he got a 29 on his reading. So, significant. So combinations of strategies, actually working on developing these underlying skills, has a lot of potential to help students really improve their performance, and as well as preparing them for whatever comes next. These are skills that are going to serve them well, whether, and I love Nancy to comment on this as well, but when they get to college, when they get to high school, when they get to graduate school, or whatever they're being, I think of private school admissions testing, I think of gifted testing. I think there's a lot of opportunities for kids to take tests these days. And the skills that are having these demands put on them that are not necessarily content or knowledge kinds of things are going to serve them well pretty much no matter what. You agree with that, Nancy?
Without question. And so I don't mean to minimize it. When we talk about test prep, we realize that it tends to be more, action-oriented, short-term goal. But we think that test prep actually provides a tremendous opportunity to understand underlying needs, things that might not manifest in the classroom, but will come up later in life, and build that self-awareness around them. And so you can use test prep as sort of a platform to create that awareness around the student, to understand that their verbal memory isn't as strong as their visual memory, and that can be a problem in college. So now, even if maybe it didn't make a huge difference in my test prep because of the time constraints, I could actually still work on that skill, and it's going to make an enormous difference for me in college. So I think that that's very, very much the case. In terms of Betsy spoke a bit about some of the great successes on students using BrainWare and then their ACT and SAT scores. We similarly, again, not with BrainWare, but Mindprint, and the scores can sort of attest to one, making sure that students choose the right test and having a marked difference between choosing the SAT and the ACT in a way that's frankly, I think far more efficient and effective than taking 2 4-hour tests and then saying which one did I do better on a particular day.
Which is what happens a lot, that's for sure. Yeah, and I want to underscore that. I was not implying at all that one is a replacement or you choose between them. They're accomplishing very different purposes, and why I think that together they would be just amazingly powerful.
Right. I do want to say that. And again, and I was saying the same thing as well. I think they're multifaceted programs. This is just one application of both BrainWare and Mindprint and how they can be used together. The other examples that I would use is even within improving scores, we have seen by giving tutors this greater awareness of where to put the focus and put the expectations, that they've seen significant improvements. In many cases, they've taken Mindprint and been able to, even in that short period of time, successfully get students accommodations that wouldn't have otherwise qualified for accommodations. And you might imagine for a student that's struggling with executive functions or processing speed, getting time and a half over regular time, just that alone can create dramatic improvements in their scores. And so we have several case studies about improvements that have come just from starting with the Mindprint when frankly they often start with the test score and they're not happy with it, and then they say, well, what can I do differently? Come to Mindprint and realize where the root cause of the issue is, and can come up with some really successful focused strategies to support.
Great. Well, I'm not seeing any additional questions. Maybe we could go to the slide that has my contact information on it at the end, just so that people know how to, especially if they're watching this afterwards on the recording. But this is how you can get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you. If you are already using Mindprint and would like to try out the test prep reporting, we'd be delighted to help you with that. We'll send out some more information following this. If you haven't yet had a full tour of either program and would like to do so again, once again, we would be very eager to help you do that and give you sort of the full perspective on how they can be used and in different contexts. I know we have a number of both clinicians and tutors and other kinds of learning specialists on the call today, but can be used in schools and other venues as well. So I'm going to check one more time. Karen, did you see any? I don't see any additional questions. So I guess, Nancy, we're getting really good.
We're trying. We know we're trying, so.
Well, yeah, we're just very excited about some of the opportunities this opens up to support students in achieving their goals, and especially when in stressful test-taking kinds of situations. So, Nancy, thank you so much for joining us today. Karen, okay, I see. She's just posting a link in case you are interested in doing that. But thank you, Nancy. Thank you, everybody else, so much for joining us today. It was great to be with you, and we will look forward to seeing you again at another webinar sometime soon. Have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.